Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Black Raves Matter series. I'm your host, Tammy Gibson, and I'm so excited. We have Mr. Thomas Jackson. He is the new leader of the St. Augustine Historical Society, and he's also the first Black president of the St. Augustine's Historical Society. And so I've done a lot of research on you, Mr. Jackson, and I can see the griot of St. Augustine. So I'm so happy to have you here. So before we start, if you could please tell me your background, because you have a very inspiring story.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me today. Uh, I was born and raised in St. Augustine, Florida. I kind of went off for a few years to school up on the highest of seven hills in Tallahassee, Florida. Attended FAMU, and after matriculating at
Come on.
FAMU, I came back to St. Augustine. Really, I've been here all my life. So I've been kind of trying to work here in the community. Um, I I've been working quite a bit. Once I got back here into St. Augustine, I started working with the West Augustine Improvement Association, and off and on, I've been working with that organization ever since. So I was one of the early members, even though the organization started before I came back home in the 50s. When I got back here in the 70s, I started working with it and been working in the community ever since.
All right, so can you please, regarding the city of St. Augustine, how many African American cemeteries are there?
Well, as far as the count, we have to think about the cemeteries in a kind of a continuum, because before, I would say, the early 1820s, 1810s, Blacks were really buried in other cemeteries that around the community, around St. Augustine per se. And then, of course, after the Civil War, and then, of course, Reconstruction period, you got to a point where African Americans weren't buried in quote unquote white cemeteries, so to speak. But I would say, if you ask the question, how many in St. Augustine per se, there's at least two. In St. Johns County, I know there's a couple of others. Armstrong Cemetery over in the western part of the county. Then there's a couple of cemeteries on the south end, and they were mainly associated with churches. Like I was saying, when I say back in the day, but in the early part of the 18th century, a lot of the cemeteries were part of the church grounds, and they were it's hard to tell how many of those actually exist, because a lot of the churches would create their own cemeteries on the grounds. And then, of course, when the cemeteries deteriorated, or the church moved, or the church was sold, the grounds weren't kept up, excuse me, that they should be. And they just kind of disappeared with time. But the cemeteries that has been documented, mainly of African American cemeteries, is the Armstrong Cemetery in Armstrong, Pinehurst and Sebastian cemeteries in St. Augustine, West Augustine, and the Woodlawn Cemetery. Those are the four main cemeteries that we see a lot of African, and mainly African Americans, buried, almost exclusively, I should say, exclusively African American burials.
Okay, so can you talk about the histories of the the Saint Sebastian and the Pinehurst Cemetery?
Okay, the Pinehurst and San Sebastian cemeteries. I you know I've been doing some research on it, so this is a kind of a project in process, so to speak. But I know it was originally started by a group from the Oddfellows Hall. There was an Oddfellows Hall on Washington Street in St. Augustine. And Washington Street was kind of the mecca, so to speak, of the Black community. And a lot of activity happened on Washington Street. You know, it was kind of like with the barber shops, the stores, and the Oddfellows Hall was a place where a lot of entertainment came to town and performed. And if I'm not mistaken, I was told Little Richard performed there. James Brown came through and performed there as well. And it was kind of like the Chitlin circuit, so to speak. So the Oddfellows group initially started the San Sebastian Cemetery, and then the Pinehurst, which is just behind San Sebastian, was started a little later, shortly thereafter. Now the Oddfellows started here in St. Augustine, I understand, in 1907. So we would have had burials there. Probably those individuals who were born prior to slavery and probably died after 1907. But we've seen some burials there. It just goes back to 1840. So the headstones show that they were born 1840, then died, I would have guessed, after the cemetery was established or was moved from another location, maybe a church cemetery to that location. Now, that's maybe a little bit of the history. During that time, I want to say the early 20th century, that was the most exclusive place for African Americans to be buried, and that would have been especially in the St. Augustine area, Pinehurst, Sebastian, and Woodlawn cemeteries. Now, the African Americans buried in more recent times in the Evergreen and other white cemeteries would have been more in the 60s, I'd say mid to late 60s, when the civil rights period kind of gave a rise to a lot of African-American burials in white cemeteries. So, but prior to that, it was exclusively burials in African-American cemeteries. Now, I say there's a gap because when you go back to, let's say there's some of the cemetery that predates the United States, maybe the Talamato Cemetery downtown St. Augustine, or the Huguenot cemeteries. The Talamato Cemetery was the Catholic cemetery, and the Huguenot cemetery was Protestant cemetery. Now, in the Talamato Cemetery, there are Blacks buried there. Let's say Jorge Beasu, who fought with Toussaint Louverture in the Haitian Revolution. He was actually buried in the Talamato Cemetery. So we know that there were Blacks buried in cemeteries, older cemeteries, but there was that period of time, I guess, with the Civil War period and Reconstruction, where there was segregated burials then. But prior to that, there is some burials definitely in quote unquote white cemeteries.
Okay, so as the new leader of the cemetery, what are your plans and what do you plan to do?
Well, I actually helped the group. I'm not really the leader per se. the vice president of the West Augustine Improvement Association, and our president, Mr. Willie Cooper Sr., is the president of the society, I
Okay.
mean, of the association, and he has, done a great job. I just ended up by himself working with trying to restore the cemetery to look a little better
Mm-hmm.
than what it did. I got involved, especially more recently, when I went out to look for my grandfather's grave site, and I couldn't really find it. It was about maybe 6, 7 years ago, and I couldn't find it. So I looked and looked and talked to some folks, and finally got a location on it, but I still couldn't find the headstones. So talked with Mr. Cooper, and he had worked with some guys to get it cleaned up. I actually paid for a guy to remove a tree, a big, maybe it was about a foot and a half wide tree, and get that moved out of the cemetery and cut up. And they come to find out that the headstones that I was looking for were not even in that location, but it was in a different location. But with the help of quite a few folks in the community and with the coordination of the Improvement Association, the cemetery really looks a whole lot better, and you can find at least the site where your loved one was buried at that time. So it's a comforting thought to know that it's being kept up, at least somewhat, that we can be able to go in and visit with the site.
Mhm. Okay. How many of your family members are at rest there? Do you know?
Well, I'm not sure how many in the long run. I do know my grandfather and grandmother are buried there side by side, and they were buried. I'm not sure how the cedar tree got between them, but there's a cedar tree that grows right over the top of the headstones. And I know back in the day that was a way of planting something that would live on, and it was kind of an African tradition to plant something that would actually live on. So, um, but as I know there's other family members there, especially since my family was here in St. Augustine prior to Civil War.
And can you name some prominent African Americans that are buried at both cemeteries?
Uh, well, you said prominent African Americans that's buried there.
Yeah, in the city of St. Augustine that are at rest there.
Well, I'm not sure if you know any of them. They were mainly local heroes, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I do know that they're in the Woodlawn Cemetery, which is maybe a block and a half away. There's Nathan Collier and Sarah Blocker.
Mhm.
Um, Nathan Collier was the president of the Florida Normal and Industrial Memorial College when it was in St. Augustine, and now it's Florida Memorial College.
Mhm.
Well, excuse me, it's Florida Memorial University in Miami. And then Sarah Blocker was she's a great Floridian, and she also uh, did quite a bit to keep the college going in St. Augustine. But in the cemetery itself, there's quite a few, like I said, local heroes
Okay.
in Pinehurst and Sebastian, and
Mhm.
um, they've done a lot to keep the community going.
How you doing?
So we do know that there's some heroes here in the cemetery itself.
A couple of names you can say in St. Augustine that were just local, like entrepreneurs or educators or.
Well, let's see. I see where Sine is on the line. She may be able to mention a couple.
Okay.
Uh, did you just have a couple that you know of?
How's everybody? Good, just emptying some of these rooms before we got.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, there's definitely some plumbers, and the plumber family is quite prominent here in St. Augustine.
mhm.
There's the Clark sisters who were very well known here in St. Augustine as well. There's uh Miss she wrote an article for the St. Augustine Record, which was very uncommon during that time for an African American to be a reporter and write for the St. Augustine Record. But
Someone put in Samuel White and Willie Carl Singleton.
okay, Sam White and Willie Carl Singleton are two of the St. Augustine Four.
Oh, okay.
And they I'm not sure if most people know of the story of the St. Augustine Four, but there were four kids two boys and two girls. They both participated in the civil rights movement in the 60s. They went before the judge during that time after they were arrested for sit-ins. And the judge ordered their parents, to sign an agreement that they would not participate anymore in the movement. Well, the kids told their parents, no, don't sign. The parents did not sign. And the kids went off, and they sent the kids off to reform school. So these were 15, 16-year-old kids that had to go off to reform school. And I'm not sure if you know the story of reform schools, that they found quite a few unmarked graves. And I say quite a few, I mean, maybe the hundreds of kids who went off to reform school and never came back. But they went off to reform school. They spent about 8 months, came back. Jackie Robinson came to town and took the two girls back with him to New York for a little while. But anyway, we call them the St. Augustine Four because they are the four kids who resisted segregation, and at that young age, they stood up for their rights. The other young lady I was just mentioning, she had an article called Versanoi's Corner, and she wrote what was considered, quote unquote, colored news in St. Augustine. And anything having to do with society, more of a positive light of the Black community, she wrote about it in the St. Augustine Record. Now, the St. Augustine Record did cover news about Blacks, but it was mainly derogatory news, so to speak. And it was news. I mean, it was who shot who, or who fought who, or who did this and who did that kind of thing. But Miss Holloway, she really wrote about the NAACPT, the church anniversaries, who had a child, a birth of a child, baptisms, things like that, that really keep the community going and is more of a positive influence.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring up a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so we're going to go through here. So this is some of the members of the association.
Oh, yes, that's a picture of the cemetery in the background, and the 5 of the members of the West Augustine Improvement Association.
Mhm.
There are others, but these are the ones I guess that was there that day and got in front of the camera. But
Mhm.
I think that was a project where, well, that's a more recent project. So I think it was an interview going on at that time we just got the shirts that Miss Lisa Lewis on the far left there organized, and I think Mr. Cooper and her coordinated those shirts. And
what cemetery is this?
this is San Sebastian and Pinehurst, but San Sebastian is towards the front. So we're actually standing in San Sebastian.
Okay.
And Pinehurst is further in the back.
Okay. And so, how long did it take to restore the cemeteries?
Well, as you can see, this is one area of the cemetery, the way it looked before it was cleaned up a little bit more. In fact, well, as you can tell, if you don't, in Florida especially, if you don't keep the foliage kept up, then basically it'll take over in no time. So yeah, you have to constantly keep the maintenance up, or you will definitely get it grown up again. Where you see here now, it says October 3rd, 2021. That was prior to a big community cleanup day that we had in October. But we had other cleanups prior to that. But this pretty much started one of our larger cleanups. So you can see all of the growth there. And the picture before that showed how much is cleaned up and how well it's been kept down. Or yes, you can see where it's been kept up like that pretty much for the past 2 or 3 years.
And how often do you do volunteer cleanup?
What was that again?
How often do you do the volunteers to come and clean up the cemetery? How often?
Well, we try to do at least twice a year, and of course the fall and then the spring, because the spring really is when it starts the growth come back again. It starts growing, and you want to try to get it before it gets too far out of hand. And then the fall, if you do it in the fall, it'll last from November, December, January, without too much growth. And now this is the I'm not sure what they call it, but it's kind of not a headstone, but a
Marker.
a marker. Yeah, it is a marker, but it's more of a plastic type marker, and it deteriorates over time. So this here is probably the best it's looked in a long time, but now it's all crumbled up into little pieces because you really can't even make out the name. But this is what was used for a lot of markers, I would say in the 80s and 90s. It may have been because of the cost of the economical to get those kind, but that's the project we want to work on now, is to get those markers replaced with headstones. And that's the project we're working on now, to get all of those markers, even if we find one that is not marked and we know who's in that plot, we'll put a headstone on that plot.
And so, like, for instance, this is made out of plastic. So when they're crumpled up, you just throw it away, or do you keep it, preserve it, or?
Well, one thing, if it's enough pieces there that we know what it says, we'll keep it and probably just leave it on that spot along with the headstone. But the headstone will stand the test of time, so to speak. There's a company, and I'm not sure of the company, but it's on the GoFundMe page that we have for West Augustine, or the West Augustine website, that they've agreed to provide those headstones to us at cost. And they last, well, they last pretty much forever, I guess.
Okay.
Now that picture there that's probably the tree that I wanted to get removed, because I thought my grandfather's site was underneath it.
Mhm.
But come to find out, once we moved the tree, it was not. So that's how it looked. And pretty much that was after maybe a couple of hurricanes too, because 2020, 2019, 2020, we had some hurricanes that came through. And since no one was keeping the cemetery up, when we had a hurricane or trees are blown down, they usually stay down because nobody removed them. And so we had to come in, and I say we talked, the West Augustine Improvement Association would come in and clean it up. But it was all done volunteer, so we had to do it when we could. And the community was a great help. I don't want to belittle that, because some folks would come out and they would actually spend 4 or 5 hours with us, and then we may do it again next 2 or 3 weeks or a month later, and we'd have a different group that would come out. So the community was a great help.
Okay. Next. I couldn't really read the column. Do you know briefly about this column? Was it regarding the cemetery?
Well, Versanoy's Corner, as I mentioned earlier, was she was buried in the cemetery. That was that was her plastic marker that was breaking up. But she was the author of this particular article, and it was a column that I want to say it came out once or twice a week in the St. Augustine Record. And as I mentioned earlier, it was more about the positive life in St. Augustine Black community, but it was called Versanoy's Corner. And I understood that her middle name was Versanoy's. So that's why it's called Versanoy's Corner. But it was news and activities for and about Black people in the Black community. Now, I do remember as a little boy taking articles over to her for her to publish in that in that column. This is actually a picture of her grave site, and the marker sitting on top of the.
Okay, I see that, because I was wondering what that was. Did it mean something with it crumbled up? So okay.
Right, and that's how it looked once the weather it went through time. It ends up that way.
Okay.
And here's some of the volunteers working. When you get to a headstone, sometimes you might not even be able to read what's on it because of the discoloration of the dirt, or Mother Nature just discolors it. But there's a type of liquid that we use to actually gently rub on the front of the headstone, and then use water to rinse it off. And you'd be surprised, the headstone kind of pops back to life a little bit. But that was a method they used. They've been using it in a lot of cemeteries all over the country, but we were able to get someone to come in and help show us the proper way of restoring the headstones. And we also trained some of the volunteers. They would come out, and before they would start working, we would give them a 5 to 10 minute orientation on what to do and what not to do to try to bring the headstone back to life. But most of the ones that can come back, we have cleaned them. But then there's quite a few that it's hard to get back to the way they used to be, and it's hard to read. But we're whatever methods we can get to restore them, we try to do that.
Mhm. So, how has the cemeteries dealt with? Because I know Florida, hurricanes. I've been to a few places. I was in Texas, and one of the American cemeteries was completely, all cobbled with trees and broken headstones and stuff. So, how has the cemetery been dealt with as far as hurricanes in Florida?
Well, I mean, that's always a problem with most cemeteries that does not have a dedicated funding source. Now, Pinehurst and Sebastian is one of the cemeteries in that group of cemeteries that the ownership has passed from person to person, group to group over the years, and no one has really stepped up in the more recent times to say that we are the owners and we are responsible for the cemeteries until the West Augustine Improvement Association came along and we said, we as an improvement association want to take responsibility for these two cemeteries. Well, if right next to this cemetery is the Evergreen Cemetery, which is very well kept. They have an endowment. They have monies that come to them. And I'm not sure how they do it, although I can imagine they usually a portion of the burial fee is set aside for maintenance. But when Pinehurst and Sebastian cemeteries, I don't think that was set up. And if it was set up, it was set up with the original owners, and the original owners have long passed on, and nobody kept that up. So I guess to answer your question, the maintenance of the cemeteries is really up to the individuals who have loved ones in there who want to take the responsibility to go out and clean it up. Because if a tree falls in the cemetery, I mean, it'll stay there until it rots away unless somebody go in and actually clean it up. So, but let me tell you, to be optimistic, I don't want to sound pessimistic. We're trying to make sure that we continue this process even long after we're gone. So what we want to do is set up that endowment, the family group who have loved ones in the cemetery, and have them continue to support the cemetery and to clean it up and keep it clean and do the maintenance over the years that it takes to keep it at least accessible to family members. So we're hoping that we can get that formula together with a little community help, with the individual family members help, with the county, which is actually the county received that as ownership, and then the county turned the ownership over to the West Augustine Improvement Association. So we're hoping the county would help as well. And then of course through grants, donations, fundraisers, and that kind of thing, we keep the maintenance of the cemetery up long after we're gone.
And this photo here, the I guess the gray burial right over here, what type of material is that that's sitting on top?
Well, that is, I know I need some help from I see some of the members are here on the call, but You know, when we talk about mausoleums, they're large enough for people to walk into, but this is more of a uh, grave cover. It covers the grave, but
Oh,
it's more of a concrete. It's kind of concrete. Yeah, it's made really of concrete. Yeah, concrete. Yeah, I see where Sinead came in and says it's a concrete vault. So it's, yeah,
oh,
so it's more of a concrete vault where the casket is put down inside the vault, and then the lid is that's actually the lid that covers the vault.
okay. Because I've been to several cemeteries, and I always see those, and I was just wondering, what it was. Or so okay, that does make sense. And is that due because of um I assumed the cemeteries dealt with flooding and stuff like that. Is that for that purpose, or was that just during that time? That's the type of uh uh the vault for the burial, the gravesite there.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I'm I'm guessing here now, but I think that maybe that person had a little bit of had a little money and
Mm,
was able to purchase a vault rather than just opening and closing a plot. And
mm,
because the over time, you know, Mother Nature just takes everything back into the ground. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust.
right.
But that would I think that would be someone who had some money to be able to afford a vault. And I'm not sure specifically who that is, but I can probably, if it's marked, we would find out. Just like that, the other one with Miss Jones, the first in the right
Mm-hmm.
corner, she had um, the concrete cover over her vault.
Mm-hmm.
So her family, as I remember, um, they were kind of they had a little bit of money. Not they weren't rich per se, but I would say they were pretty well off. And she and her sister, which was Miss Nellie Mead. Miss Nellie Mead actually is one of the founders of the West Augustine Improvement Association. So they were really active in the community, and their father actually, I think he's the one who had the property, and so they had some money. I'm assuming that um, their vaults and plots were paid for before they even passed away. This is a simple symbol, I guess, a sample of the plastic marker on top
Mm-hmm.
there. It's all deteriorated, and an example of one of the uh, headstones that we were going to be putting there. Now that's not, I don't, that's not the same person, but it's just a kind of an example, a sample of the
Okay.
replacement. Because that's actually Miss Jones's concrete vault cover.
Okay.
Yeah. But what we'd hope to do is replace them with the marker, granite grave marker to the bottom. And this is the GoFundMe information in case someone would like to help with the granite gravestone. $210 will cover the cost of one. And we've probably got, there's been estimates of over 100 that we need to do.
Okay.
But we have identified at least 10 or 15 that needs to be done right away. We know who they are. We know but then there's some unmarked graves that we want that we know who's there, but it's just not marked. Now that GoFundMe is a little more than where it is now, but on that particular image. but we're nowhere near where we need to be. So any help we can get from anyone who would like to help, each, like I said, each gravestone will cost about $210. So even if you want to give 210, 420, or whatever, you can still give a little bit, $25, $50, whatever. Every little bit helps.
Okay. And that's a great, and I'll definitely will be supporting and you know, pay for a couple of gravestones. So
Oh,
this is a great idea.
if you say you're going to be at the International Museum this week,
Yes.
okay, well, the tie between St. Augustine and the Spanish and the early American history, it's a continuum all the way. It's a lot of the blacks that's buried in this cemetery here, their grandparents, great-grandparents of Spanish descent. So Spanish and African descent. So that's something that we don't want to lose sight of.
Okay. So let me see what else. So, and one question I have, sorry, there's another hacker trying to disrupt our conversation.
Mm.
But what are you doing as far as I was doing, looking at the website as far as gentrification around the cemetery?
Okay, the website. Oh, you say as far as the website?
Well, yeah, I was talking about gentrification around the cemeteries. Um, what are you doing, or what people are doing to prevent that from happening?
Well, I'm not sure that really there's nothing we're doing to prevent. I mean, like, you mean
I guess make your voices heard. Yeah,
vandalism?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there was a tour group in St. Augustine that called the Ghost Tours, and they would always come out to the cemeteries, especially Pinehurst and Sebastian, and ride in the back and tell ghost stories about, well, just the normal ghost stories. But they used the cemetery because it was not monitored or not. But since we've cleaned it up and things look a lot better, that hasn't been a problem for now. But mainly, we just try to keep the fence up. We keep the signs up.
Mhm.
And we have neighbors across the street that kind of keep an eye on it for us. And hopefully they'll call Mr. Cooper whenever something's going on over there. So
Mhm.
that's mainly what it is. We just now as time go on and we get some more resources, we're going to try to maybe put up some cameras or something like that to monitor it and have someone monitor the cameras.
Has there been a lot of vandalism?
Well, not so much vandalism per se, but let's say that when the ghost tours come through, and then folks would come out and maybe tip over some of the headstones. And when you tip over a headstone, it takes maybe 2 or 3 people just to bring it back upright.
Mhm.
And it never gets back into position where it's solid. So things like that. And then of course, conch shells that were put there by family members, little vases, little glass jars, things like that that end up disappearing.
Mhm.
But other than that, and there's been some, but not a whole lot now that things are a little cleaned up.
Okay. Is there any does the association do like tours?
No, not right now, but I can probably see that in our future.
Okay.
If somebody wanted to have a tour of the both cemeteries, but now I'll put it like this: unofficially we do, because I think today there's a TV station coming out today, and they want to tour the cemetery. So on demand, yes, we do, but then we don't do it specifically for identifying graves or history. We do it more for exposure and for our cause, so to speak.
And my last question is, what would you like to see in the future as far as with the two cemeteries?
Well, I mean, this may be a little more personal note, but then I would like, especially since I have someone there, is to be able to go in the cemetery, identify where my grandfather and grandmother is located, and go there and be able to sit and just meditate, and then be able to, leave. But I think is I know where my grandfather and my grandmother is, but a lot of folks don't know. And those are the things that we want to hopefully rectify, identify, mark, and then have a kind of a template to show exactly who is where. Now, when we probably never find everybody, but if we can get as many as we can, I think the people who really benefit would be the people who be able to find out where their loved ones are and where they're located.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got one more. Does the association is there like a database of the names of the ancestors?
Yes. Now there has been at least 2 that I know of, maybe a third survey that's been done of the cemetery. And in conjunction with Flagler College, they did, Flagler College located here in St. Augustine, they did a grid search, and they located depressions, and they located markers, and they located headstones, and it was all identified and marked and written out. Depressions, of course, they don't know who's there.
Mm-hmm.
The markers sometimes are, not legible. Headstones, you can probably read them once they're cleaned off. So that process has been done. I know the last one was probably 2 years ago, and I think that might have been in conjunction with the cleanup day, 2021. And then there was one done prior to that. I want to say maybe 2014, 2015, something like that. So there is, and we do have, like I have a copy of it myself somewhere, but we do have a copy of their results. Mm-hmm. And we're working from that to maybe add to what we know.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Jackson, for this opportunity for you to speak about the two cemeteries. I will definitely donate a couple of, headstones, and I have a couple of friends that are cemetery historians as myself, and we're going to do what we can to help you with that.
Okay, well, we appreciate that. Every little bit helps.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to thank everyone, all the guests that came here for our Black Graves Matter series with Mr. Thomas Jackson. Next month, I will be interviewing Ms. Cannell Brady. She is the founder of Our Mammy, and she's going to talk about the history of Holt Cemetery that is in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I'm looking forward to speaking to her. She's full of history and knowledge, particularly what they're doing to preserve the cemetery in New Orleans. So thank you so much. And this is recorded, so I will post this on my social media. And I always end the podcast with, have you checked on your ancestors lately? So thank you and have a great day. Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.